Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Utah Jazz, a team that has really looked like one of the best teams in the entire league in the early goings of the NBA season. Ultimately, I'm going to end up talking about what I think their chances are of winning an NBA title, what makes them so good, and if they're in that contender tier of teams. With that, we'll go ahead and get right into it. Drop a like, drop a subscribe if you like this type of content. It'd mean a lot to me. Now, prior to the NBA season, Utah Jazz were seen by a lot of people, including myself. I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of this, as a playoff team, but not really one that had a lot of opportunity to make some serious noise this season. In a league full of a lot of star-studded rosters like the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, the Sixers, teams like that, for example, the Jazz were kind of an afterthought, especially after they blew that 3-1 series lead to the Denver Nuggets during last year's playoffs. However, as a Thunder fan who spent all of last season, a team that defied all expectations, I watched every single game of them. I can firsthand tell you that expectations mean absolutely nothing. Expectations are absolutely useless. They gave the Thunder last season a 0.5% chance of making the playoffs. They were incredible. Now, the Jazz, up to this point, have exceeded everyone's expectations. I would say even most Jazz fans' expectations. I don't know many that thought they'd be this good. They've won 15 of their last 16, and they are 19-5, which is not only the best record in the Western Conference, but the best record in the entire league. That's better than the Lakers, that's better than the Clippers, that's better than the Nets, better than absolutely everybody. You get it. And it's not really too hard to see why. They're led by Donovan Mitchell, a bona fide all-star guard. He can pretty much do it all. Great scorer. He can facilitate at times. Solid rebounder for his size. He can jump out of the gym. Some super athletic plays. You have Rudy Gobert, a two-time Defensive Player of the Year candidate. A guy who I feel like gets forgotten about a lot. He's a contender again for the award this season alongside guys like a guy like Miles Turner. Maybe you want to throw like a Joel Embiid or a Ben Simmons in there, Giannis, AD, guys like that. Rudy Gobert is absolutely still in that conversation, and I feel like people don't talk about him that much. He is the third best center in the league, in my opinion. He's really good. They've got Jordan Clarkson, who is the leading Sixth Man of the Year candidate, I'd say at this point. He's just an absolute bucket. He scores from everywhere on the court. I don't think he knows how to pass, but oftentimes that doesn't matter because the ball just goes in every time he shoots it. You've got a revitalized Mike Conley, who has really started to look like his Memphis self again, the guy that the Jazz thought they were going to get last season. He's kind of become that player this season. You throw in several other key pieces, including a great scorer in Bojan Bogdanovic, another guy who came in last season who looked great before injury, and you've got a guy like a Swiss Army knife type guy, like in a Joe Ingles. Among other guys, you could talk about a Derek Favors. You could throw in other guys too. Ultimately, they are top 5 both offensively and defensively, and additionally, they are 8-4 versus teams over 500. So they do absolutely it all. They lock you up, they score, and they're really good against teams that they would be playing in a playoff series. As I said previously, I wasn't super high on the Jazz coming into this season. This was mainly because of how they burned me last season. So prior to last season, I picked them to be the first seed in the West. I thought that the addition of Mike Conley, a borderline all-star guard, and Bojan Bogdanovic, a great scorer, alongside the progression of a Donovan Mitchell who was just coming off some pretty big playoff performances, a Rudy Gobert who's, like I said, a very underrated player in this league, and a great coach in Quinn Snyder. I think Quinn Snyder is one of the most underrated coaches in the NBA. He really does it all. He gets his players to play hard, a fantastic defensive coach, just all around underrated. And I thought all that would give them that punch to be like a threat out west. Maybe a team like the Hawks a few years ago where they are very, very good, but they ultimately end up losing in the Western Conference Finals as the 1 seed. Eastern Conference Finals for the Hawks, where they lost like a LeBron-led Cavaliers team, maybe like the LeBron-led Lakers last season. That's kind of where I thought that they might end up alongside with like a Clippers. However, Mike Conley struggled. He didn't look anything like the player they thought they were getting. Bojan Bogdanovic suffered an injury that kept him out of the bubble after they were kind of on a little bit of a roll before the bubble, and they entered the playoffs as a 6 seed after their 8 seeding games, and as we all know, eventually blew a 3-1 series lead to the Denver Nuggets. But they've really bounced back with a vengeance. This is possibly due to the pain that they were caused by blowing that lead. I know Donovan Mitchell took it really hard. He talked about it a lot in interviews after the series, obviously talking about how painful it was to blow a lead like that. And ultimately, it cost them a second round spot. They potentially lost a Western Conference Finals berth because the team that they just barely lost to ended up beating the Clippers in 7 games. A team that was really, really good that I think the Jazz could have at least competed with and maybe even had the potential to beat them. The Clippers really just didn't look like themselves in the bubble. Maybe the Jazz could have pulled it off, so that might have cost them that Western Conference Finals berth. But ultimately, all this brings us to the question that is the title of this video: is this Jazz team for real, and can this Jazz team compete for a title? My answer is kind of a cop-out, and I think it's a maybe. While they certainly have like the statistics and the record to prove that they do belong in that title conversation, my one reservation about them is their lack of star power, and that's a huge thing in the NBA. Before, I mentioned that Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert are both like all-star type players. I think both of them are going to be all-stars this season. I think you have to give it to them unless the Jazz has some major collapse or something, or that one of them suffers an injury part of the all-star break, which I'm praying that they don't. I think they're both going to be all-stars, and while that's very critical to their team's success, winning a championship almost always comes down to star power above that all-star type tier. You usually need a superstar to win a championship. And while Donovan Mitchell is certainly a star player, and I think he has the potential to be that championship centerpiece at some point, I think the main question for the Jazz is he ready for that right now? Because that's what matters this season. Is he ready right now? Not if he ends up being a championship centerpiece 5 years down the line, 3 years down the line, even next year. It's right now. And only 3 teams in the 21st century have won a championship without an all-NBA first teamer. You've got the Spurs, you've got the Pistons, and you've got the 2011 Mavericks. Those are the only 3 teams that have done it. And not a single team has won a championship without at least one all-NBA second teamer. With guys like Luka, Curry, Lillard, Harden, just as 4 examples, and 2 of the MVP frontrunners at the center position in Embiid and Jokic, barring a huge increase in production, I really don't see a way that Mitchell or Gobert earn one of those nods to one of those first 2 teams. However, third team is definitely possible for them, especially if the Jazz keep winning like they have, and they keep putting up pretty big numbers. However, we have seen teams with not much star power find a lot of success. A pretty recent example, in fact, just last year, the Miami Heat, a team with just one All-NBA player in Jimmy Butler, who was All-NBA third team, had a lot of success, and they honestly have kind of a similar build to the Utah Jazz. The Heat were led by Jimmy Butler, a star player who has really shown ability, especially last season, to step it up in the playoffs, a great defensive center in Bam Adebayo, an older player that saw improved production in Goran Dragic, especially into the playoffs. He might have been their second best player at times, a great shooter in Duncan Robinson, and really capable role players, guys like Jay Crowder. And of course, they had a great coach in Eric Spoelstra, a guy who a lot of people, me included, think is a top 3, 4, 5-ish coach in the NBA, depending on where you put him. Kind of similarly, the Jazz are led by a guy as Donovan Mitchell, who admittedly is worse than Jimmy Butler. I don't think many people are going to argue that Donovan Mitchell is better than Jimmy Butler, especially on the defensive end of the ball. But Donovan Mitchell has shown a lot of capability to step it up in the playoffs. He showed it very clearly last season against the Nuggets, where he averaged 36.3 points per game. They have a great defensive center, similar to the way the Heat had Bam in Rudy Gobert. We've talked about that. Rudy Gobert is the best defensive center in the NBA. I don't think a lot of people are going to argue that. You've got an older player that has seen improved production in Mike Conley. He would, of course, have to carry that over into the playoffs, but it would be interesting to see if he could. He has traditionally been a pretty solid playoff performer, and while they lack a shooter like a Duncan Robinson, they do have very, very capable shooters and role players in guys like a Joe Ingles, who a couple years ago was one of the best shooters in the NBA, and he still is very capable, even if he is a little down from that top echelon. You've got a Bojan Bogdanovic, who I talked about, great scorer. He can shoot the ball really well. Royce O'Neal, who's an underrated shooter. Jordan Clarkson, who can just get buckets from anywhere. And additionally, like the Heat had Eric Spoelstra, the Jazz have a great coach in Quinn Snyder. So there is a framework to find success for this Jazz team. That all being said, though, ultimately the goal of this video is to talk about if the Jazz are a title contender, and a team that kind of fits that Heat mold. They didn't win the title last season. They ended up falling in 6 games to the Lakers, and while that's a huge accomplishment, the ultimate goal for that team, and ultimately for this Jazz team, is to win a title. Additionally, the Heat team got very hot at the right time in an environment that really complemented their play style well, as they were a shooting team in a bubble, which a lot of people talked about how clearly it favored shooters. I think it was pretty obvious how it favored shooters a little bit. I'm not saying that the Heat's run was a fluke at all, because everyone was on the same playing field, but I will say that the bubble definitely played into their favor in terms of them being a shooting team. I don't think a lot of people are going to argue that. It was very much a shooter's gym. So it's going to take a lot for this Jazz team to win a title. There's very little room for error, and when you don't have quite the superstars that other teams might have, you don't have a LeBron James, you don't have a Kevin Durant, you don't have a Steph Curry. When you don't have these guys, or like a Kawhi Leonard on the Raptors, when you don't have these guys, you have to play perfect basketball at all times. Especially when you're going to be coming out of the West and facing a team like maybe like this. Even if you get out of the West, you have to face a team like the Sixers or the Nets or the Bucks. There's just so much superstar talent in the NBA right now. It's very difficult to win without one. And they're a great squad with really high potential, And if they continue trending upward and avoid the injury bug, and if they make some potential pickups at the deadline, I'm not entirely sure what they would go for, but if they can make some pickups, I would not count out this Jazz team. This Jazz team definitely has a lot of the pieces that you need to win a championship. They have a great coach, they have really good players, they play great team basketball. It's just that one thing, that star power thing, that really worries me. Now, even if they don't end up winning a title, Utah's going to give whatever team knocks them out a huge scare, because I really don't see this team going out very easily. I think the Pacers are another team like out east that could give a contender a scare. But the issue with the Pacers is I don't think that they're as good as this Clippers team, or not Clippers team, excuse me, this Jazz team. The Jazz, though, they could not only scare you, they could knock you off. I would right now probably put this Jazz team like right below the Lakers and the Clippers out west. I think right now they're probably the third best team out west, and that's only because of the whole star power thing. You've got LeBron, you've got a Kawhi on either of your teams. You even throw in an Anthony Davis and a Paul George. There's a lot of proven success on those rosters. So I would put them third below those two teams. However, there's a lot of time to prove me wrong. The Jazz finished this first half of the season playing Boston, Milwaukee, the Heat twice. You've got the Sixers twice, the Clippers twice, the Hornets, the Lakers, the Magic, the Pelicans. So even though the Magic Pelicans not super threatening, not as much as the Hornets, when you have to play Boston, Milwaukee, 2 games against the Heat, 2 games against the Sixers, 2 games against the Clippers, and the Lakers, that's really tough. They have a really tough end to their first half of the season. It's difficult, but it does act as a great opportunity for the Jazz to establish themselves as true contenders. Although they might be without Mike Conley for a little bit of stretch of time, he is dealing with a hamstring injury right now. I know he's not playing against Boston either tomorrow or today, depending on when you see this video. I'm not sure when I'm going to get it up, but he's not playing against Boston. So, something you have to keep in mind. However, if they do find a way to dominate during that stretch, similarly to the way that they've dominated so far this season, I really don't think there's any choice but to call them contenders. If they go through that stretch of season and they continue to play the way they have, they win most of those games, beating all those contenders, maybe not all of them, but beating at least some of those contenders, I think you have to put them in that conversation. You don't have to have them as your favorite. I'm not saying that, but I think that they would have to be in that conversation. So this stretch of games is huge for me determining which side of the whole are the Jazz title contenders debate that I'm going to decide to be on going into the playoffs. Either way, even, like I said, if they don't win a title, even if they kind of struggle through this stretch of games, I'm excited to see what happens with the Jazz this season. They're a really entertaining team to watch, and it would be fun to see a team that doesn't play traditional. It was fun to watch the Heat last season without like a traditional superstar in a sense. I think Jimmy Butler is very close to that. I'm not sure if he is a superstar because superstar has such a weird definition in the NBA. It's very subjective. Some people say it's like top 5 guys. Some people say it's like the top 10. Some would say top 15. Depending on what your definition is, Jimmy Butler proved himself to be a superstar, if not borderline superstar player. And the Heat were just a really exciting team to watch last season. So if the Jazz can make a similar run, I think that would be really cool for the NBA. A team with not a lot of expectations coming into the season. A team that a lot of people have been sleeping on. I think a lot of people sleep on both Mitchell and Gobert coming in and kind of just messing up the Western Conference, which has long been thought of to be very, very difficult. It'd be pretty cool. So, like I said, either way, even if they don't end up winning the title, I think that they absolutely deserve your respect. So with that, I thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys later. Real and say back.